support. Okay, we have record. So Vanessa Parton, she is the Family Support Program Director with the Family Resources of Rutherford County.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Like Amani said, I'm Vanessa Parton. I'm the Director of Family Support Services with Family Resources in Rutherford County. And as part of Family Resources, I'm the Director of the Child Advocacy Center here in Rutherford County. Our agency also hosts two other programs, which would be a foster home and a domestic violence shelter as well. But I'm going to be focusing mostly on the services that we offer children and their families. I have got a slideshow I'm going to show you. Let me share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay, so the Clara Allen Family Center is the name of the Child Advocacy Center here in Rutherford County. And I know you all are from a lot of different counties in North Carolina, but most counties do have a Child Advocacy Center as well, and they'll offer similar services to what we offer here. And you can find the name of the center in your county at cacnc.org. It has a list of every advocacy center in North Carolina. And I'll put that in the chat when I'm finished as well. So, like I mentioned, the Clara Allen Family Center is part of the umbrella agency of Family Resources, and we have the Child Advocacy Center. And within the Child Advocacy Center, we offer some support groups for parents, one called Circle Parents, one called Relatives as Parents. And then we do a lot of child abuse prevention and education program. And I'm going to be focusing on what we do to help children who are victims of sexual abuse as we go through this PowerPoint. This PowerPoint is kind of generalized to the Clara Allen Family Center, and April also happens to be Child Abuse Prevention Month as well, so you'll see some information about that as we go through. So we like to inform people about what child abuse is because it's a lot of areas that people sometimes don't consider or don't consider risky. Um, Child advocacy centers were founded to help children of sexual abuse primarily and have since expanded to provide services to children who are victimized by other forms of maltreatment as well. So you'll see some of that on there. But as far as child sexual abuse, we consider anything that would be sexual assault to an adult would be considered child sexual abuse if it's happening to a child. Any kind of a child, we don't call it child pornography, we call it CSAM, which is child exploitation material. Anything that is, viewing or has a focus on the child's genitals in photography or something that you might see on the internet, that's considered a CSAM or child exploitation material. And those things are also considered child abuse as well. So we serve victims who have been exploited in that sense or that have been physically sexually abused. The way that we handle cases like this, when it is brought to our attention that there has been a report, we might receive a report through DSS or through law enforcement, or potentially both are involved. At that time, we will get a call from the investigators who are involved, and they will set up a forensic interview for the child. Differs than how it would be handled with an adult, mainly because we try to be, well, everyone should be doing this for children and adults, but we try to be very sensitive to the child's developmental needs and any trauma they might be experiencing. So when they have their interview, they come to an advocacy center that has a neutral and very child-friendly focus. It's not done in a place that's like a police office or like an interrogation room. So, and I think I've heard that some shelters and some police office stations are moving towards making a more friendly environment even for adult survivors as well. So we contact the non-offending caregiver. We'll give them some information about what the forensic interview is going to be like. We'll give them information about the medical exam and what to expect when they come to the center. So when they come to the center, they're greeted by our family advocate. We introduce ourselves, we show them around. It's not like a traditional office setting. Everything that we put in here, we are very mindful of the impact it might have on the child and the experience that the family is going through. So I'm our main forensic interviewer. Forensic interview is just a neutral and evidence gathering conversation with the child that is conducted in a way that's legally defensible and can be used during prosecution. So that there are many different protocols that are used for forensic interviewing, but they all are kind of based on the same scientific research. And the focus of those is just really getting a good narrative description from the child that's non-leading, so, and to gather information that can be corroborated by the investigators and to just get an accurate depiction of the events that occurred and the impact to the child at that time. So during the interview, the investigators watch from a monitor room, and I'll check in with them to see if they have any additional questions that I need to ask the child. During that time, our family advocate meets with the non-offending caregivers of the child and lets them know what is going to happen through the investigation process, lets them know what to expect in the aftermath of the interview as far as the child's potential reactions, lets them know what to expect as far as potential emotions or signs they may see after an event of sexual abuse. And then also, we make referrals to community partners for therapy, for tangible needs, for legal reasons, just any kind of thing that the family may need. It doesn't even have to be related to that acute incident. We'll still try to help them because often the families that we see here at the Advocacy Center are vulnerable for many reasons, not just because they're involved in a child maltreatment investigation like this. After the forensic interview, the child will have a child medical exam. Um, During that time, the child is examined by our nurse. She has specific training in child abuse signs, symptoms, and she's able to use a colposcope to take very detailed photography. So when it comes to sexual abuse, she does photograph their genitals and looks for any kinds of injuries or signs that they may have been abused. Most exams on children are going to be normal, and this is a good thing because children's bodies are very resilient and injuries heal very quickly. That certainly doesn't indicate that, a sexual abuse incident didn't happen. We also do testing for STIs. We refer for treatment for those things. And she also does screening tools that give us an indication of where they are with their mental health, if they're having any behavioral challenges or school challenges. And we'll make referrals after we gather that information as well. And we share that with the caregivers and then the investigators that are involved. We meet once a month, or actually twice a month, to discuss all the cases that we have seen at the Advocacy Center. And so you'll see these people on the right. These are the people who are involved in our multidisciplinary team. So during that time, we talk about the child's history, the case, what's been going on in the case, and then how we can best help that family. This leads to better prosecution outcomes. It leads to better trauma-informed services, and it really just helps us all be on the same page and how to best help them. We gather more information, and we can use that information to make the right referrals and to share the right information and to help that family. The family advocate is the one who kind of maintains the longest contact with the family, making sure that they follow through with referrals, accompanying them to the court proceedings if there are any, or if there's restraining orders, things like that. She gives information about that. She provides transportation if needed. She's really like that shoulder to kind of help carry that burden that they're going through with the investigative process. I covered some of this already. We do the forensic interviews and have that support and advocacy piece for the child and non-offending family member. We do child medical exams, and then we always refer to trauma-focused therapy of some kind for the child. We have MOUs with several different counseling agencies in our county that offer TFCBT, which is a trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy, and then CFTSI, which is like a shorter version of that for children who had a really acute recent incident, because oftentimes children don't disclose sexual abuse until much later. I think the average age of people who disclose sexual abuse in childhood is in their 50s. So oftentimes this might not have been an acute incident, but if it is, there's certain therapy that they can receive that will reduce any potential PTSD symptoms. And so that's kind of how we determine which therapy to refer them to. we do court advocacy, and then we have some access to support groups. I mentioned circle parents and relatives of parents. Any kind of community support that would be helpful, we'll refer them to. And then we also do a lot of prevention education for kids and for adults about preventing all kinds of abuse. We have a program designated for preventing child sexual abuse. You may have heard of. It's called Stewards of Children, designed by Darkness to Light. That's specifically for adults, and it's about how to protect children that you have in your environment from child sexual abuse. We also have a program for adults. We kind of refer to it as like a healthy relationships class, but the people who are referred to that group are survivors of some kind of sexual violence, and that is led by a therapist as well. I mentioned a little bit about the forensic interviews, and I won't get too much into that. Other than, I mentioned that they're used in a legally defensible way, and they're conducted by a neutral person that doesn't have a stake in the investigation. Our family advocate is a huge resource for the family. These are the kinds of things that they assist the family with. I mean, any kind of need these vulnerable families present and are willing to be vulnerable enough to tell us about, we'll try to help them and help them access those services. Already going through an investigation of this kind where your child may have been sexually abused by someone is already very, very stressful. So we want to reduce any other kinds of stress that they're experiencing by meeting these other needs also. I mentioned that we had MOUs with other counseling agencies in our community. Specifically here, we refer to Solid Foundations, Blue Ridge Hope, and Flourishing Life. And that doesn't mean we can't refer to other therapeutic services as well, but we specifically have an MOU with them to provide payment if they aren't able to pay. So we want to make sure that payment is not a barrier for them to receive services. So if all of these groups, except for Flourishing Lives, accept Medicaid, and then if they don't have Medicaid, we can pay for their service. And then for adults that don't have insurance, we can pay for up to 6 sessions for them as well, because we recognize that it's not just the child who might need those therapeutic services. I mean, the caregivers often have a trauma history as well. This may be triggering to events that they had experienced in childhood. And also just the impact of the investigation. They often need therapeutic services as well. And you can see on this slide the other kinds of therapy that we often refer to. All of those are recommended by the National Children's Alliance. Our Child Advocacy Center is accredited through the NCA. And so part of the standards we follow is making sure that children are being linked with therapy that is proven to be evidence-based and useful in reducing their symptoms. And so these are the specific ones that we refer to. I mentioned a little bit about our MDT, and you can see the mission there. Our mission as a group is to promote justice and healing of child victims of abuse and violence by coordinating investigative, prosecutorial, treatment, and prevention services, while ensuring that the children disclosing abuse are not further victimized by the intervention system designed to protect them, which is, that's a tough thing because even going through an investigation can be traumatizing for a child. And often one of the reasons children don't disclose because the impact to the family, they recognize that it's going to have a lot of big changes in their life if they do disclose abuse. So we try to help with those things, and that's the goal of our team. Sometimes the outcomes are not what a law enforcement officer would want for law enforcement or a prosecutor would want for prosecution. It's really, the focus is really what's best for the child and family, and that's not always prosecution necessarily. We discuss those cases twice a month, like I mentioned before. These caregiver support programs are designed to build resilience and hopefully prevent some abuse. Circle Parents in particular is conducted using techniques that are proven to reduce stress in a household and potentially reduce abusive incidents using the 5 protective factors. And then relatives as parents, it's similar. Most of those people involved in the support groups are referred from the advocacy center, and they have been on the receiving side of investigative services related to child maltreatment in some way, or have been impacted by substance abuse within the family, different things like that. I mentioned a little bit about prevention education. We provide all these services free of charge. So if you are work for an entity who would be interested in learning more about any of these, we'd be happy to come do a training or presentation on those. We offer Stewards of Children, that's the child sexual abuse prevention training program I just mentioned. And then we also have information for children and adults on digital safety, especially if you have some relatives raising younger children. Just that generation gap can be a big learning curve as far as digital safety. So we want to make sure people are informed there. Um, the W-5 mandate reporting covers all kinds of child maltreatment, and it's very specific on how that should be handled in North Carolina. Monique Burr is a Child Safety Matters program for kids K through 5 is the one that we focus on, but there's also elements for adult education and then team sports and other youth activities as well. And then we offer access to parenting classes, including Triple P, Nurturing Parenting, and another one called Parenting Wisely. And they're all based on like positive parenting, nurturing, discipline type techniques. This is just about April. I know we had said earlier that it's Sexual Assault Prevention Month, but it's also Child Abuse Prevention Month. And so this presentation was one I had used earlier with another group about that. And we just want everyone to know that everybody can be helpful in preventing child abuse, basically by raising the awareness that it exists, particularly child sexual abuse, because it's something that people course, don't enjoy talking about, and it's kind of done in secrecy. So just raising the awareness that it exists and normalizing conversations about protection can prevent child abuse in communities. And we want people to understand that and not be afraid to talk about it. In our area, all three municipalities, which is Spindale, Forest City, and Rutherfordton, have declared April Child Abuse Prevention Month, and they adopted a proclamation to recognize that as well. You may have seen in your communities pinwheel gardens that are blue, and this is kind of recognizing Child Abuse Prevention Month as well. Things you can do in April if you want to raise awareness, you can do these at your own advocacy centers as well. Just planting a pinwheel garden, wearing blue. April 4th is passed, but I would encourage you to visit your CAC and see the services that they offer and get more information from them. And, you know, they're going to be offering a lot of the similar services that we do, volunteering and donating, and then participating in any kind of prevention training. One thing that we do here in our community is annually at this time is to have a Prevent Child Abuse slogan contest, and this just passed for us. We had the ceremony the beginning of April, kind of to kick off Child Abuse Prevention Month. We do body safety education with the 4th and 5th graders in our community with Rutherford County schools, and then also some private schools that are in our county, and they all have an opportunity to receive education about protecting or about having healthy sexual boundaries, protecting themselves, and what the rules are for adults to keep them safe. Because ultimately, it's not a child's job to keep them safe. This is up to adults, but we still want children to be informed about what healthy boundaries look like. So after the 4th and 5th graders receive that information, we also send home information to the parents and provide lessons to the teachers. And then they have an opportunity to create an image and slogan about child abuse prevention. That wraps up with a ceremony. We have about 100 honorable mentions, and then we have the top 3. And the winner, we put on a t-shirt, we advertise in our community, and this was our winner this year. So you can see her button. It says, "Be the light, don't fight end child abuse." So that was our winner this year. And then this last one is just a slide of my information. If you're ever interested in learning more about what we do here at the Advocacy Center, or need a liaison for someone in your area that works at a child advocacy center, I would be happy to help you with that, or provide any kind of information about statistics related to child sexual abuse and prevention education, or any other thing that I could potentially be helpful with. Please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for that informative presentation and also the important work that you do to help protect and support children and families. I would like to open it up for any questions from our participants. And I see we do have resource information in the chat, so please take note of that. If we don't have any questions, I'll go ahead and move along to our next speaker. We will have some more time for questions at the end. So if you do end up having a question pop up in your head, don't feel afraid to type in the chat or towards the end, ask additional questions. So our next speaker will be Marianne Helm. She is the Triad Area Regional Manager for CareNet Counseling.
Hi, everyone. I am here to talk a little bit about how to respond and support folks if they have experienced assault or sexual abuse, and what to do about that. I do have a few slides to share as well. And I wanted to start off a little bit with how do we respond as individuals, because part of that is sometimes we get these reports not just as professionals in the field, but also as folks who know people and those types of things. Give me just a second to adjust my screen so I can see everybody again. All right. So if somebody we know or somebody we work with lets us know that they have been assaulted in some way, then one of the most important things that we can do is just listen, offer support. And the suggestion that always comes up is active listening. And the difference for those of you guys who've not been through active listening training is basically it's a lot of listening without judgment or advice. So we want to be able to provide that support to folks without telling them what to do or how they should feel or all of those types of things. But then often as quickly as possible, we want to get them connected with somebody else who can provide them with some kind of professional support. We want to make their hotlines, and every county has different hotlines and numbers, and then there's national hotline numbers as well. And so the resources in your community may be a little bit different than the resources here in Forsyth County, but most folks have resources in their local community for that. We also want to make sure that folks get medical support, that they go and see a doctor, that they get treatment afterwards, talk to law enforcement if they're comfortable with that, ideally, and then get mental health support for those types of experiences. And then that's my part. Everybody assumes, and I'll talk a little bit about this next, that experiences of trauma must lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a lot more information about PTSD out there than there used to be. But what is post-traumatic stress disorder really? Ultimately, PTSD is exposure to a traumatic event, which leads to a group of category or symptoms afterwards. So if you've had this traumatic event and then you start to have these symptoms, including re-experiencing the trauma in some way, so think flashbacks, nightmares, experiences of trying to avoid memories of the experience. So staying away from things that remind you of that, whether it's a place, a person, a thing, and staying away from those things, and that's an avoidance symptom, or negative changes in cognition, which is our thoughts or our moods. And those can be specifically related to our experience of trauma, or they can be more general. My mood can just be different after that event. And then our arousal or reactivity symptoms. So any kind of changes in my physical body or emotional reactions in my daily life. If I'm experiencing all of those things, then I probably have post-traumatic stress disorder, and I probably need to talk to somebody about it. However, what we do know is about 50% of people will experience some kind of trauma in their lifetime, but only 6% of adults are reported to have PTSD at any given time, and only 5% of adolescents. So essentially 1 in 7 adults that experience a trauma turn around and develop PTSD, and only 1 in 10 adolescents who experience trauma will develop post-traumatic stress disorder. So we don't assume that just because you've been through something really hard or tough that means that you're going to develop symptoms that you need to get specific mental health treatment for, but everybody could use some coaching and help and support in those things. So what happens if I do want to get therapy for the trauma that I've gone through? What should I be looking for in a therapist? Ultimately, my therapist should be trying to work on these sort of four group or categories of things while I'm in therapy. So all the trauma therapies, no matter which ones they are, anything that's evidence-based for trauma is always going to reduce the impact of the trauma on my emotions, behaviors, and thoughts. It's going to improve my ability to cope with both the specific trauma that I went through and daily life in general. It's going to help me enhance my safety. So how am I making safe choices to walk through the world? And how can I increase my sense of feeling safe in walking through the world? And then it's going to help me strengthen my social support network. So ultimately, that's what your therapist is going to be helping you work on in all of those categories. And we spend a lot more time with the first, reducing the impact of trauma, and then you work on the other ones as you proceed through the therapies. So the types of therapies that people will typically get, she mentioned some in the last one. Those are the kid-specific ones. So that's TFCBT, or trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, or PCIT, which is parent-child interactional therapy. For adults, we use cognitive processing therapy, EMDR, narrative exposure therapies, medications. Those are the three that I tend to see most commonly. There are others that can be effective for trauma as well. But there's a difference between trauma-informed and evidence-based trauma treatment. A trauma-informed therapist assumes that everybody in their lifetime has experienced some kind of trauma and that they're walking through the door as a client with some kind of trauma history. Evidence-based trauma therapies are going to be something that's going to specifically address both my emotional, behavioral, and physical reactivity to the therapy, and that's been proven with science and research to actually help with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so we want to be able to be really clear on that when we're looking for therapists or making recommendations to therapists as to whether they're trauma informed or whether they're providing an evidence-based trauma therapy. So those are sort of what we look for. And I didn't have a lot to share, but does anybody have any questions about the types of therapies that folks should be looking for, or what therapists might do in helping clients when they experience post-traumatic stress disorder or reaction to trauma? All right.
Quick thing I wanted to add after what you just said, Mary, that oftentimes when people come to the advocacy center, even investigators, they're kind of misinformed about therapeutic services. So they're just like, oh, this child needs like TFCBT, let's sign them up for that. But really, like Mary was mentioning, you don't just get signed up for that because you had a traumatic experience. I mean, when they go to intake, they'll have an assessment and they'll, see what kind of symptoms they're experiencing, and then we'll recommend the appropriate kind of therapy afterwards. So, and like she said, not every child needs TFCBT or some other kind of trauma focused therapy because they're not necessarily going to have those symptoms. And sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, but some of my clinicians have mentioned that providing that kind of therapy without it being necessary can even really have a negative impact on the child. So is that right, Mary? You tell them if that's right. But
yeah, I try not to. I didn't include that in, but that's true. When we go through TFCBT, so I'm certified in TFCBT and EMDR, and ultimately what you learn in TFCBT is you don't provide TFCBT if they don't either have full post-traumatic stress disorder or whether they have what we would consider sort of incomplete, it's another name in the DSM, but almost PTSD. So you have to have 3 out of the 4 categories in order to really qualify for TFCBT, because if you don't, then you're going to take those 9 and 10 who don't develop PTSD and you're basically telling them that they should. And so we really try to stay away from that. And so when you're thinking about for those evidence-based trauma therapies, those go to the PTSD folks. If their symptoms are severe, they're interfering with their daily life, they're showing up regularly, or they've persisted for a significant amount of time, you want to give them one of those evidence-based trauma-specific therapies. But if they've just been through a traumatic event, then your traditional talk therapy, play therapy, the types of things that anybody would get can be equally as effective as an evidence-based trauma therapist. And so your trauma-informed therapist can be equally as effective with an individual who's just experienced a trauma event but isn't having full PTSD. And so you do have to be very careful with that. And I think that that's part of why active listening can be so very helpful as a person who's hearing about these types of events, because we don't want to assume what somebody's experience with their trauma is or how injured or harmed they are by it. And so if I freak out and make these assumptions and lay these things on top of somebody, then sometimes they can adopt that for themselves, as opposed to just listening and being an open receiver for that, and then offering resources can be very helpful.
I just wanted to add one thing. This is not about therapy, but just a service that people might not know is available. And that is that in many counties, the agency that provides services to survivors of sexual assault, often it is the domestic violence agency, also have after hours, well, maybe 24 hours, emergency response to the emergency department to help people. Often they take a change of clothes with them in case their clothes, the clothing they were wearing are being used for evidence. But they can also do some safety planning with that person and start at that point offering them some resources as well.
Yeah, well, sorry I keep interrupting. The PATH shelter, which is the domestic violence shelter in our county, which is part of our agency as well, they do have an advocate there who can meet someone at the hospital and help through some kind of like their acute exam or just accessing those immediate resources. And there is a crisis number, you can call anytime as well. So I'll always answer.
Yeah, Forsyth County used to offer that service as well through Family Services. I volunteered with them when I was early in my career. And ultimately, as the person who answered the sexual assault crisis line, I spent 90% of my calls were to go to the hospital and to be an advocate in the room. Because the hardest part about the sexual assault exam when you go through it is that nobody else can be there with you. You can't have a family member or friend, regardless of age. So your advocate, the person that the hospital would call me and ask us to come out and sit with that individual, because you can have a neutral advocate, but you can't have a family member. It interferes with the collecting of evidence. And so that can be really helpful for those individuals, because you just want to have somebody there to hold your hand and tell you it's going to be okay while they're poking and prodding and doing things. So. Other questions or thoughts of things that I did not include?
Thank you, Marianne, for walking us through that information and giving us your perspective from the counseling world, just as far as things to look out for, and just the differences, specifically, which I thought was pretty interesting, the differences between being trauma informed and having that evidence based therapy. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. We are going to move on to our last speaker, Shelby Holland. She is the tribal liaison with Partners Health Management.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Give me 1 second to get my screen shared. Dang. Alrighty. Can I get a thumbs up from someone? I'm sorry if you already did it, Jeannie. Okay. Alrighty. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at this month's Community Cafe. My name is Shelby Holland, and I'm an enrolled member of the Lumbee tribe here in North Carolina. I hold a bachelor's and master's in social work. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker. My education experience has paved the way for my current role as tribal liaison with Partners Health Management. Since this month is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, I was given the opportunity to talk about the sexual assault and the impact that makes in the Native American community. Okay, so what is Sexual Assault Awareness Month? it's pretty self-explanatory. This month is dedicated to increasing knowledge, raising funds, supporting survivors, and allowing those impacted to talk openly about their experience. There are events such as this one, and activities that are held during the month. The hope is that the human rights, public health, and social justice piece of this traumatic puzzle will establish and reinforce prevention efforts. Okay. Now, before I get into it, if you have ever attended a training or an event that I've spoken at, you know that I always tend to start with statistics for me, and I hope for my audience, it paints the clearest picture possible for whatever topic I am presenting on. So for today, we'll be running through statistics in the Native American population regarding sexual assault. So for that first bullet there, it's explaining that Indigenous people in the U.S. are twice as likely to experience sexual assault compared to all races. And then jumping down to that second bullet, in 2016, a study found that 4 in every 5 Native American and Alaskan Native women have experienced some form of violence, whether that be emotional, physical, or sexual. I was able to track down the percentage of just sexual, since that's the topic for today's presentation. And based on that study in 2016, it looks like around 56% of the violence that they were tracking was reported to be a form of sexual violence. The last bullet states that 90% of the perpetrators were non-tribal. This number is very shocking, but I am going to get into that a little later on in the presentation. So I'm going to jump to the next slide. One more slide for stats. 1.5 Native American and Alaskan Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. Law enforcement reported 25,817 incidents of violent crimes from 2021 to 2023. Again, since the topic is sexual violence this month, I was able to find some stats, and in those same years, the 2021 to 2023, there were 8,575 incidents that were strictly sexual crimes. And then the last bullet, 41% of sexual assaults against Native Americans are committed by a stranger, 34% by an acquaintance, and 25% by an intimate partner or family member. Okay, I typically try to get through data as quickly as I can while still getting the facts across. Reason being, no one enjoys talking about numbers, right? But more importantly, my family is majority women and my culture is matriarchal. So presenting on these types of topics is never a feel-good moment for me, but then again, this month isn't easy for any of the survivors. So I did rush the data a little bit. If you felt that from me, I apologize. So whenever I get finished reporting on stats, the main question that people have is always why. Well, let's get into it. Like I mentioned previously, the culture is female-centered, which just means that women are and always have been revered and held sacred and held in great authority. So during colonization, women were targeted as leaders by the opposition. So targeting authority figures was essential to controlling and conquering individual tribes. These traditions have unfortunately created a pattern and a mindset around Native Americans by outsiders. Next slide. Okay. Another pattern that we see in modern times that can often lead to why Native American women are targeted is because we are very over-sexualized in the media. Oftentimes you will see Halloween costumes, movies, and other forms of media of half-dressed people representing a Native American woman. Their stomachs, arms, legs, etc. are exposed, but traditional regalia is quite modest. I actually think I put some pictures on the next slide. Yep, here they are. So clearly you don't see much skin from our women. Initially, I did have some over-sexualized pictures on this slide just to show some examples, but ultimately decided to do away with them. But if you just think about the children's movie Pocahontas, she has on like a strapless dress with like one strap over the shoulders, and the dress ends above the knees. Obviously, it's a movie, right? But when you see images like that of Native American women, especially when you're at a young, impressionable age as a kid, whether you know it or not, it could be stored in your mind to think of Native American women in a sexual regard. Next slide. So, how does sexual assault impact tribal communities? Every experience of sexual violence typically snowballs into some form of health inequity. I have a few examples listed there. PTSD is one of them that could be a possibility. Acute stress disorders are there, suicidal ideation, substance use issues, sleep disorders, etc. I included the cycle on the right side of the PowerPoint because this is where Native Americans sometimes differ from other races. So let's start at the top. A trauma occurs. Instead of addressing the trauma, we typically let it fester, let it build up until we meet full-blown criteria of a mental health disorder. And instead of addressing the mental health disorder, we typically, again, let it fester and build up until we begin self-medicating. And while we are self-medicating, chances are we will eventually be in an environment or a situation that is not the safest. And guess what happens? Another trauma. So, and around we go. So, I actually just spoke on the barriers to treatment for Native Americans in our member cafe that we have at Partners. And I discussed why this wheel is the way that it is and how we can stop it. If that is something that you are interested in seeing, it will be posted on Partners' website. You can either find it on member engagement or tribal engagement's webpage. Okay, next slide. The legal system has failed Native Americans in the past, as we all know, and it continues to do so. If you have ever been on tribal lands, here in North Carolina, the only federal land that we have is in Cherokee, North Carolina. So if you've ever been there or even to another state with a federal tribe, then you know that it is that they operate entirely independent from the U.S. government. Tribal lands are considered sovereign nations, and they have their own judicial, executive, and legislative branches. Currently, the U.S. courts do not have the jurisdiction to go onto tribal lands and prosecute anyone, which includes those non-tribal perpetrators that we were talking about that causes 90% of those crimes. Also, there are very few resources for the criminal justice systems on tribal lands, and as of right now, there's not a whole lot of plans to improve them for the future. However, the Violence Against Women Act was first enacted in 1994, which is amazing because the courts were finally starting to realize that there was a disproportionate amount of women being harmed. And it only took until 2013 for Native American women to be added to the act. Please hear the disappointment in my voice when I say that. But with the amendment, it gave tribal nations the power to prosecute non-tribal members for domestic violence, which is a step up. However, other crimes like sexual assault, child abuse, or rape are still not included in today's time. This law went into effect in 2015, but even 10 years later, most tribes are still trying to find resources to build out criminal justice infrastructures like courts, jails, etc. Okay. So now that I've given the stats, the court's failures, and the media's failures, I want to talk about what is being done to help. There are anti-violence programs that are being offered for women on tribal lands across the nation. There is now a domestic violence hotline that has been instated with the help of the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. And lastly, Congress includes 4 Native American representatives in the House and 1 in the Senate. And I think that is awesome because representation matters. A seat at the table matters, and having our voices heard matters. Let's make it a little more local now. What is being done in North Carolina? Pamela Brewington Cashwell was nominated by Governor Josh Stein as Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources in January 2025. She is the first Native American woman to head a cabinet department in North Carolina. We also have Representative Jared Lowry, who is a member of the Lumbee tribe, and he is in the North Carolina General Assembly. So once again, having that representation at the table, it's a big deal. And they serve as our voices. Here are some committees and boards that North Carolina currently has. I won't read through all of them, but I wanted them to be included to show North Carolina's efforts, since this state in its entirety was at one point entirely tribal land. Okay, go to the next slide. Alrighty, let's filter it down even further. What is Partners doing to support our tribal members in the counties that we serve? Well, I was hired. Like I said, I am the tribal liaison. In 2021, North Carolina required tribal liaisons to be implemented in tailored plan and standard plans. Partners prioritized hiring a Native American, which was not a requirement. Excuse me. I provide annual trainings to all 975 plus employees that we currently have. I provide trainings for stakeholders and providers. I do presentations at our community cafe and member cafes. I assist with social media posts. I sit on the health equity board to ensure that there is representation for the tribal community, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In the picture to the right, you'll see Sheena Richardson, who is the tribal liaison for Trillium Health. She is of the Halawasaponi tribe. In the middle, you'll see Davin Wildcat. She works for Via Health, and she is of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. And then you see me. We were at the North Carolina Indian Unity Conference in this picture, which is held once a year. And it's a great resource for all natives, whether they're stakeholders, providers, or even just members wanting to attend to learn about the latest resources that are taking place, you know, just kind of have that camaraderie as well. All right. Here are some upcoming trainings that I have if you're interested in attending. May is going to be a big one. Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women. We call it MMIW. MMIW is close to BLM in the Black community. It's very similar. That'll be next month with Member Cafe. And then in October, I'm back here. So if you attend regularly, I will see you in October. We will be doing a Native American Heritage Month prep, because in November, it is Native American Heritage Month. And if you're interested in attending any other trainings, I host trainings outside of Member and Community Cafe. My contact information is on this slide, and I'd be thrilled to see you all. Please reach out if you have any questions or want more information. And I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for your time today, and to Community Cafe for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Shelby, for that insightful presentation and just giving those illuminating statistics and walking us through that information, specifically how sexual assault impacts Native American women. Please take note in the chat. It is the link for the on-demand training that Shelby mentioned. So if you're interested in taking that specific training, the link for it is in the chat. We have just a few minutes left for our time allotted for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask your questions.
Amani, we did have a question regarding PowerPoint access in the chat. This is for the three speakers. I don't know if you're comfortable or are able to share the information that you have, but if you are, we'd like to send it to everybody that was in attendance today.
Thank you, Amber.
There was also a question, and I don't know if Rob is still here. Specific, I think, to Vanessa about wanting to understand the different types of cases that were or were not prosecuted. Specifically because you mentioned, some of them may not have turned out as law enforcement had intended or had hoped. So would you mind expanding on that just briefly more, please?
Sure, absolutely. So database cases are so hard to investigate and prosecute because there's often not a lot of evidence. These things are done in secrecy. It's a lot of he said, she said type situation, even when it comes to children. So, and oftentimes the perpetrators are very good not only at grooming their victims, but grooming the environment and people. They end up, with a lot of support where people believe, they're not doing anything. So it's difficult to prove. Um, so DSS, the burden of proof for law enforcement is much higher than that for DSS. They can take child protective measures a lot with less information than a law enforcement officer would have to charge. And I've found that this varies greatly between county, even within the same prosecutorial district. I think it depends a lot on who the law enforcement officer is, their relationship with the district attorney, etc. So sometimes the cases that we see, uh, the victims don't want to participate, and so that makes prosecution almost impossible. And that happens more often than you would think, especially teen girls, it seems. There's so many barriers to them disclosing anyway. If they've come in and they're having a forensic interview about being victimized, they may not consider themselves a victim, especially if it's like trafficking situation. And when I say trafficking, I mean things where they're engaging in some kind of sexual act for something of value, like within the community, not necessarily like being taken over state lines or something. And so if they are in their minds willingly engaging in these kinds of activities, and they're not willing to testify, they're not willing to cooperate, they're not willing to share the information that they have, then you really can't prosecute that person. And so those are not the outcomes that we hope for. But then also, there are times when children are very young and um, they it's just really difficult for them to testify across from the person who victimized them, because the defendant has the right to be they have to be in the same courtroom and addressed by the victim. Like they're going to be together, they're going to have to testify unless there's some kind of special circumstance. And I think like in different jurisdictions, people are more willing to do what's necessary to provide that special circumstance, but it's not something that frequently happens here in Rutherford County, unfortunately. As far as like testifying in a separate room, like via microphone, since I've been here, which I've been here for 10 years, that hasn't happened. Um, and not because it doesn't exist, because I know that it does. But that's not my lane, so I can't really weigh in on why or why not. That doesn't happen, but for whatever reason, the willingness isn't there. And obviously if a child's like 3 or 4, they might have difficulty testifying anyway. But really, I've noticed in some other counties that charges might come a lot more quickly than maybe some in our area. So it could be a unique issue here, but mainly I just feel like the nature of the child abuse investigations makes it difficult to prosecute. And maybe, we don't have cooperative victims are the main reason why they wouldn't necessarily go our way in that sense.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you again to all of our speakers. I will now pass it to Amber Matthews for our closing.
Me again. Thank y'all for joining us this morning as we highlighted this very intense and traumatic series of events that happens to people more often than it should. And now we have some resources in the communities that we live and work in to get those people, survivors of those events, connected to proper resources that can help them heal. We will be having our next community cafe on Wednesday, lost my notes already. I apologize. May 28th at 10 a.m. We're going to be talking about the connection between the brain and the body and physical and mental health. So please, we look forward to for you to join us then. And if you have any questions or comments, please let us know. And if not, then have a great rest of your Wednesday, and thanks for joining us again.